have you ever kind of just thought about, like, what did you want to be known for? Like, if people were kind of to step back and just kind of describe you, maybe at the end of your life, maybe now, like if someone's just going to give a phrase or a sentence about you, what would it be? I mean, we don't want to try to summarize a whole life in just a few words, but, you know, at some point, someone, me or someone like me, is going to do that for you. And what if you wanted to kind of really boil it down, right? Because it's interesting, when people do stand out things, they seem to get really short descriptions, right? That you think about, you know, where we live. Now, it's a sports thing, but ride with me for a second, right? That if you live here, Tom Brady, what is he known as? The GOAT, right? The greatest of all time. Does that mean he's the greatest person of all time? Maybe yes, maybe no. He's certainly the greatest quarterback. Well, likely the greatest quarterback. Some people claim him the greatest football player. I don't really know how you can decide that. But he was the greatest of all time at what he chose to do. For those of us who are a bit older, Reggie Jackson, do you remember what his nickname was? Mr. October. Mr. October. Why was he Mr. October? Because as the pressure turned up and you got to the postseason of baseball, he just started hitting like crazy. Right? So he was Mr. October. And nicknames are not limited to sports folks. I'm going to give you a name. If you can actually tell me this person's nickname, I will give you $1. And you should put it in the offering. Right? Katherine Johnson. She's known as the human computer. She was actually an African-American woman who actually worked in the space program from the 1950s to the 1980s. Manually, well, in the early days, manually calculating launch trajectories with a pencil and nailing it. And that she was so effective at it, as they moved towards computers, she had a critical role in actually kind of helping to develop the path they used in the programs. So she's the human computer. And it turns out that even places can have nicknames. Now, again, you don't have to agree with the nicknames, but this one you may know. What's Disney World known as? Do you know? Happiest place on earth. You don't have to agree. I've heard some of your opinions before, right? But in my family, it's for my wife. My wife loves Disney World. I love my wife, so by proxy, I love Disney World, right? And we do have a good time when we go down there. And there's something, I had an experience not that long ago, and it's kind of interesting to me when I write these messages, I don't write my lead-ins. I actually write the message, and then somewhere in the process, the lead-in kind of comes to me, and often it brings kind of memories to mind for me. And actually, it's funny, one of the best Disney World trips I ever had was just less than 2 years ago, October 2022. In fact, it's so good, I want to show you a couple clips from my vacation. Slideshow time. Nah, it's video. I want to show you kind of one of the second day we were there. For those of you who can't see in the back, the trees are blowing, the rain is pouring down. It is basically the park isn't even open. The weather is so bad, right? So this is kind of just shortly after we got there, and the night got even better. Here's a video at night, right? Raining even harder than it was before. I mean, it is pounding down. There is lightning. The wind is blowing. It is generally not what you would call a dream vacation, right? And just to give you a sense of how hard that wind's blowing, that's my phone's microphone. That's not like some microphone you stick out there. That's the microphone on the bottom of my phone picking all that up. And did you know that even that rain had a nickname? Do you know what it was? Ian. That's Hurricane Ian. So I live in New Hampshire, but made it a point to be in Florida for the fourth worst hurricane they've ever had in their history. And it's kind of interesting because Florida is kind of a place of hurricanes. And, you know, if you probably remember from the news, it's less than 2 years ago, that the hurricane hit Florida pretty hard. The southwest coast was really, really bad, heavy devastation. Central Florida wasn't that bad like that, but it was bad. Central Florida got over 15 inches of rain in just over 24 hours. That Disney World itself actually got over 10 inches of rain in that same amount of time. And you would think that I would tell you what a horrible time I had. I will tell you that as a guy who's been to Disney World more times than I want to admit, it was one of my top 3 or 4 vacations ever. Now, how could that be? Am I just like a nut? Well, probably. Different question, right? Is it just like I love bad weather? Is that the deal? Well, no, because an interesting thing kind of happened. Is that an organization that was prepared for what it had to face intersected with a group of people who were prepared to make a difference. There's something that's not really well known about Disney World, which is they have something called the ride out crew. Ride out crew, like you ride out the storm. And what these are employees that are specially trained to deal with long-term weather situations, and they make an agreement with Disney that in the event that a storm is coming, they will show up to work with their suitcase, and they will stay until it's over. And these are some of the most committed folks, in my experience, I've ever met. That they were, no matter what was going on in their own lives, they were committed to making sure we had fun. Because I don't want to minimize it. This was a crazy storm. This was a bad, bad storm. But for 2 days, I couldn't leave the building I was in. Yet I had an absolutely fantastic time. And so what's kind of interesting is that, when we think of this name like Hurricane Ian, right, for many people, if you live in Florida, that's a really dark memory. But what I remember as I rode out that storm were people who chose to make a difference. People who chose to say, you know what, we're in this storm together. And so we're going to try to make this the best experience for you that we can. And it's kind of wild because as I look back on that storm, I see a sense of joy, of comfort. Again, I'm not blind to people suffering. We do what we can to support them. But my own personal experience, because of a group of people who chose to be in the storm with me, it made all the difference. Now, you obviously can see where I'm going with that, right? As Christians, what are we supposed to do, right? We're supposed to be in the storm with people, that we're not supposed to hole up just where we're comfortable, right? We're supposed to get involved. We're supposed to go where things are difficult. We're supposed to weigh in the places that we wouldn't necessarily choose to go on our own. And so I want to kind of revisit this idea of nicknames or phrases that we should be known for. So what I want to do today is I want to kick off a new series called Hello, My Name Is. Because what we find is that as we look through the New Testament, and as we read the words of Jesus and we read the words of other authors, that those who put their faith in Jesus are often assigned other names, other nicknames. And the one I want to look at today is one that Jesus himself says that we should be known by. Jesus says that we should be the light of the world. And this idea of light is a pervasive idea throughout the Bible, from the Old Testament all the way through the New Testament. And the light is generally this idea of the presence of God or of truth or of wholeness, right, of having completeness. And so when Jesus keeps saying that you should be the light of the world, he's talking about us as individuals. If you have put your faith in Jesus, he's saying that you should be the light of the world, but also his church. Right? It's interesting, the word in the Bible, in your English Bible that reads as church, that was actually not the original language. You know what the original language actually says? His gathering. In other words, it was always about the people. The church, there's a long story of how it got to church. We'll talk about that another time. But there was never this concept in the original language of a church. It was a gathering of people. It was always supposed to be about a group of people coming together to do the work that Jesus had given them. So I want to look at one place where Jesus introduces this term, and he actually gives this to us speaking directly to a group of disciples. And this actually comes from the Sermon on the Mount, right? The Sermon on the Mount, that message he gave where there's this big crowd around, he's there with his disciples, and the author Matthew tells us that as Jesus prepares to speak, he looks directly at his disciples. And he starts speaking. And one of the things he says is that you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. So the light of the world. So you're meant to be the presence of God, or as it comes forward, the presence of Jesus. So that one's pretty straightforward. But what is this thing about a town built on a hill cannot be hidden? Well, he's actually painting a word picture. Right? He's trying to lay this image out. And for us, that image isn't immediately clear. But for his first century listeners, there's a particular image that would have come to mind immediately. We have to understand how cities were built in that part of the Middle East at that time. Do you know what most large buildings were made of at that part of the time? They're actually a form of limestone, they're big white limestone blocks. Like if you ever see ruins in Jerusalem, if you look at them, they're kind of dirtied up, but they're actually white limestone rock. Well, if you take a desert landscape and you have a hill and you build a bunch of buildings out of big white limestone, what's going to happen when the sun hits that limestone? It's going to reflect. Right? It's going to be a beacon. It's going to shine out. Right? So people who are walking through the desert in need of rest, in need of a place to go, could see it long before they even got there. And the thing that's kind of interesting is that it's not that the city is emanating its own light. The light's coming from elsewhere and being reflected. And what was kind of interesting is that those cities were even visible at night. Because when people would hang their lanterns out and it would be dark, even the small light that was the lantern would reflect off of the white. And as you had hundreds of those lanterns hung out, even as people wandered in the dark, not even sure where they're going, they could see the light in the distance, and they knew if they head towards the light that they could find something that they needed, that light would shine like a beacon. So Jesus is saying that, okay, he's kind of setting this thing up, right? That as people wander through the desert, they can see a place to go. And so as he sets this up, he says, hey, you're the light of the world, right? A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. And then he continues, and he makes this point that this idea of being the light, the thing that shines out to people, is something that we're meant to do actively. We don't just kind of wait. Because he just goes on and he says, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. So what does he mean by that? I mean, because if you've been a Christian for any period of time, if you've been inside a church at any time, you have almost heard this, don't put your light under a bushel. There are all kinds of kids' songs about it, all kinds of stuff. What does Jesus mean here? It means that you don't just sit in church on Sunday morning and hope somebody walks through the door. Right? It means that you live out your life in such a way that you reach into other people's lives. That this idea of connecting, of doing the work of Jesus, of being the light of the world, is that you shine out, you go. I mean, imagine if the city on the hill turned all the lights off, but if somebody walks in, we'll turn them on. Well, in a dark desert with no electric lights, that's not going to work very well. The idea is we shine out. That our role as Christians is absolutely to be together and to worship together. But as a disciple of Jesus Christ, right, if you have put your faith in Jesus, it is your responsibility to have a piece of your life that reaches out to other people. I mean, that's part of why we do the school thing, right? First, it's the right thing to do, but also it's a chance for us to be a little tiny bit of light and providing supplies to the schools, to expecting, Jesus doesn't tell us to give hoping people will give us something. We give because it's the right thing to do, because God calls us to. Jesus instructs us to. That's part of our responsibility. It is not a passive action. And it applies to us as individuals and applies to us as a church. That is what we are meant to do. That should be a fundamental part of our existence. Because when Jesus created his church, when he created his gathering, it was to have purpose. It was to do things. It was to make a difference. And this is one of the clear purposes that he's laid out for us. Now, how do we do that? How does he expect us to do it? I guess the question is, why does he expect us to do it? That if we don't do it to expect things in return, why do we do it? Well, let's see what he says. He says, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your what? Good deeds, and glorify your Father in heaven. It doesn't say that they can see your sign that says turn or burn. Right? It says see your good deeds. Go forward with love. Go forward with open hands. Go forward with open heart. And that's how people will see the light that I've put inside of you. That an essential part of our faith, according to Jesus, this isn't my words, according to Jesus, an essential part of our faith, an essential part of being a follower of Jesus Christ, is that we make it a point and we look for opportunities to do good in the life of other people. Now, why do we do that? Do we do that to try to get a full church? I mean, we hope that people will see the light and come to know God and be with us here in worship, but that is not why we do it. Do we want to brag about the things that we've done? Is that why we do it? To make sure everybody knows the stuff we're doing? No, Jesus tells us why we do it. To glorify God. That we glorify God by doing good for others. There are many ways we glorify God. Worship is one of those ways we glorify God. But it is not the only way we glorify God. The other ways we glorify God are much more outward focused. One of those is doing good for others, making that a central part of our identity. That should be a top priority in our individual lives and our top priority as a church. That there are things we should be doing collectively as a church, but we should all have some version of a personal ministry, right? Of something that we do that we feel that God is calling us to do. In fact, I would argue that doing good in the local community is why God created the idea of local churches, or Jesus created the idea of local churches, right? That it's not a big central church that decides everything, that churches are planted all throughout the landscape, right? Throughout the countryside. It allows us to be a local presence, to do local good, to serve our local community. That's critical. And it doesn't matter whether people believe or not. That it's not our job to try to force people to believe anything. It's not our job to make any conditions on this stuff. It's just to do the work. So that's part of this idea of being the light of the world. But it's not the only time Jesus talks about this. Now, he actually talks about this idea of being a light, or there being a light, in a very different context according to Luke. So the one we just looked at that comes from Matthew is where Jesus is talking to his disciples. And so he's talking specifically to people who have put their faith in him. If you put your faith in Jesus, he's talking to you. But now Luke captures for us a time where Jesus is surrounded by another crowd. A crowd that does not believe in him. A crowd that is somewhat hostile towards him. Where some people are actually accusing him of being a devil. Right? Like they're that hostile to him. And so Jesus makes a point about light there. Now keep in mind again, he's not talking to his disciples. He's talking to people who don't believe in him and are even hostile towards him. And Jesus goes on and he says, sounds kind of familiar, right? No one lights a lamp and puts it in a place where it will be hidden or under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand so that those who come in may see the light. So now on the surface, it feels like he's making the same point. Now, he's making a similar point in the sense that light is his presence. But when he was talking to the disciples, he was telling us how we should be the light. In this case, he's actually talking about himself. And as he says that, he carries on and he says something that's kind of, I used to find this so confusing. You know, you guys are smarter than me. You may clue in quicker than I do. But I was confused by this for a long time. After this, he says, your eye is the lamp of your body. Now, when I hear lamp, I think of, that thing on the wall right there, right? Because lamps emit light, right? Isn't that what lamps do? Do your eyes emit light? If so, tell me now. Right? Now, do your eyes actually glow? Now, are there creatures whose eyes glow? Any excuse to show you a picture of my cat, by the way? This is a picture of my cat. Now, his eyes are glowing. Are his eyes literally emitting light? Now, some of you think cats are from hell, and that's what they do. I understand. Some people feel that way. I don't feel that way. But are his eyes generating the light that we see there right now? What are they doing? Reflecting it, right? Their eyes are reflecting light. So an eye is not a lamp in the sense that that's a lamp. So what is Jesus talking about when he says Your eye is the lamp of your body. It's the thing that lets the light in. I mean, how does our vision work? Right? Is that when I look outside and I can see, it's the street and the sidewalk and buildings, light is traveling to us, it's traveling to all of us. It hits my eye, and where does it go from there? To my brain. Well, assuming I have one, right? To my brain, right? But the light gets into my body through my eyes. And that's what Jesus is setting up. That when someone stands in the presence of the light, in the presence of Jesus, in this case, he literally means himself. Your eye is the lamp of your body. He says, when your eyes are healthy, your whole body is full of light. But when they are unhealthy, your body is full of darkness. See to it then that the light within you is not darkness. What is he doing? Any guess? He's laying out the path of salvation. Right? That when he talks about light and darkness, that the only way to salvation, right? The only way to this eternal connection to God, the only way to receive fully the promise of Jesus is to choose to receive the light, right? To allow that light to come in. And so what he's saying is that when you see the light, it's up to you whether you choose to receive it or not. If your eyes are healthy, in other words, you're willing to see the truth, then you receive the light. If you don't want to receive the light, that's your business. You can make that choice. And this idea that see to it then that the light within you is not darkness, he's making it really clear that this idea of salvation, this idea of relationship to Jesus Christ, cannot be earned by works. In other words, you don't get there by doing good. Doing good is not the path to connection with Jesus. And if we kind of contrast it to what we were looking at earlier, doing good is important, but we don't do good to be saved or to be connected to Jesus, to have life in Jesus. What he's saying is that it's a response to that. That no amount of trying to generate your own light is going to work. The only way to get there is to receive it. And so this idea that is that as light flows into our eyes and into our bodies, the love and light of Jesus flows into our hearts when we're willing to receive it. Now, for the people that Jesus was talking to, right, he was standing there right in front of them. And he's saying that when you see the light, it's up to you whether to receive it or not. But that was the first century. What happens in 2024 in Pennacook, New Hampshire? Is Jesus going to physically stand in front of anybody? I haven't seen him. Right? But he does have a body. What is it? You are the body of Christ. So when Jesus says, you are to be the light, okay, going back to when he was talking to his disciples, that you are the light, right? He gave us a name. You are the light of the world. Jesus is saying that it is our responsibility to live that out, to embrace that truth, that when we opened our eyes and received the light of Jesus, that light flowed in us. And we've got a choice. We can just keep the light for ourselves and not worry about everyone else. But that would be doing quite the opposite of what he said. He says, you are the light of the world. And that you should be like that shining city on a hill, right? Think about this. Jesus used the same description of a lamp for you that he used for himself. Right? He described himself as a light on a lamp that is not covered. And he says that so are you. You've got that choice. That if you will embrace the gifts that you've been given, if you will accept that light that's in you, and you will make it a point to do what? To do good deeds. Not to build that relationship with Jesus, but to reflect the light of Jesus. That brings glory to God by doing that. And so what we are called to do is to be the light in a very, very hurting world. A light that is filled with pain. A life that is filled with suffering. A life that is filled with difficulty. A life that is a raging storm for so many people. And we are to be a small part of the solution to that. To come forward. To shine the light in the darkness. To be a rest in a lonely desert. I mean, I've talked about this a bazillion times. Loneliness is an epidemic in the United States right now. Loneliness is an overwhelming epidemic. Deaths of despair, they related to alcohol, drugs, death by suicide, they are at all-time highs. That we have to be part of the solution to those sort of things. We've got to do what we can. Sometimes we do small things like, hey, just give a kid a break and let them have the school supplies they need. That can make a huge difference. We know that the more education you have, the better your future looks. That's a really important thing to do. And you get a good education, you need the right resources. But we should also be willing to step out into bigger things. That we should all be looking for those opportunities. I mean, who in your life is struggling? Right? You don't have to go find a faraway place to do that. Right? There are people in your life that you know are struggling. Right? Is there something you can do to lift some of that burden? Is there something you can do to glorify God, is what Jesus says, by doing good for another? My friends, as Jesus followers, we are called to purpose. And there are many purposes involved. Worship is certainly a purpose. But doing good for others is a purpose. You know, sharing the love of Jesus, in other words, sharing the truth of Jesus, is one of our purposes. As the gathering of Christ, we are called to embrace those purposes. That just as Jesus was a light on a lampstand, so are you. We do that by caring for others. We do that by being willing to share our faith when the opportunity presents itself. And we do it by being willing to be in the storms that everyone else wants to go home from. Being willing to walk into those things, to be part of it. And we can do that in so many ways, right? That, you know, if you're able and you can actually be physically present with people, do that. I think that's the first choice. But we can't always do that. You know, sometimes the things we can do is just use our resources to actually prop somebody up, right? To buy backpacks, buy school supplies, those sort of things. Right? But we need to be willing to do that, to step out and to take that seriously. Jesus didn't say, hey, if you feel like it, go do your good deeds. He says, be a shining light and do good deeds to glorify God.